The first step in the genesis of the New American Bible was taken in 1936 when His Excellency, the Most Reverend Edwin V. O'Hara, Doctor of Divinity, Chairman of the Episcopal Committee of the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, invited a group of Catholic scripture scholars to plan for a revised edition of the Challoner-Rheims New Testament, primarily on the basis of the Vulgate. The plan soon expanded to include the revision of the Old Testament. Archbishop O'Hara's initiative resulted in the formation of the Catholic Biblical Association, whose principal activity in its early years was this work of revision and translation. For information on the work done on the New Testament, see the Preface to the New American Bible, First Edition of the New Testament, and Preface to the Revised Edition. In 1943, His Holiness Pope Pius XII issued the encyclical Divino Afflani Spiritu, which encouraged scripture scholars to translate the scriptures from the original languages. He wrote, "We ought to explain the original text which was written by the inspired author himself and has more authority and greater weight than any, even the very best, translation whether ancient or modern. This can be done all the more easily and fruitfully if to the knowledge of languages be joined a real skill in literary criticism of the same text." Although at this point work on almost 20 of the Old Testament books was completed or near completion, that work was abandoned and the new project of translating from the Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic was undertaken. The completed books of the Old Testament were initially published, as they became available, in 4 volumes: Genesis, Ruth, 1952, Job, Sirach, 1955, Isaiah, Malachi, 1961, and Samuel, Maccabees, 1969. Some 50 scholars collaborated on this project. These were mainly Catholics, but, in accord with the suggestion of Vatican II that, with the approval of the Church authority, these translations be produced in cooperation with separated brothers, so that all Christians may be able to use them, Dei Verbum, number 22. Non-Catholics also participated in the work. To this point the translation had been known under the name of the Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, or CCD for short. But when these parts of the Old Testament were combined with the New Testament in a single volume, it was given the name New American Bible, in part to reflect its ecumenical character. In producing the new volume, certain changes were made from the original 4 volumes. A retranslation of the book of Genesis, cross-references, new and expanded exegetically notes. New translations and revision of existing translations are required from time to time for various reasons. For example, it is important to keep pace with the discovery and publication of new and better ancient manuscripts, e.g., the Dead Sea Scrolls, so that the best possible textual tradition will be followed, as required by Divino Afflani Spiritu. There are advances in linguistics of the biblical languages which make possible a better understanding and more accurate translation of the original languages. And there are changes and developments in vocabulary and the cultural background of the receptor language. An obvious example of this is the abandonment in English of the second-person singular use of thee, thou, sayest, hearest, which had a major impact on Bible translations. Other changes are less obvious, but are nevertheless present. There have been changes in vocabulary. For example, the term Holocaust is now normally reserved for the sacrilegious attempt to destroy the Jewish people by the Third Reich. Concerns such as these are reflected in what Pope John Paul II spoke of as the 3 pillars of good biblical translation. A good translation is based on 3 pillars that must contemporaneously support the entire work. First, there must be a deep knowledge of the language and the cultural world at the point of origin. Next, there must be a good familiarity with the language and cultural context at the point where the work will arrive. Lastly, to crown the work with success, there must be an adequate mastery of the contents and meaning of what one is translating. And he praised the translation that utilizes the vocabulary and idioms of everyday speech, le parole lu for me della lingua di tutti I giorni. From an address to the United Bible Societies, November 26, 2001. This new edition is a thorough revision of the already excellent New American Bible Old Testament of 1970. Work on most books of the Old Testament, begun in 1994 and completed in 2001, was done by 40 revisers and a board of 8 editors. The 1991 revision of the Psalter, the work of 30 revisers and 6 editors, was further revised by 7 revisers and 2 editors between 2009 and 2010. As suggested in the comments above, the revision aimed at making use of the best manuscript traditions available, see below. translating as accurately as possible and rendering the result in good contemporary English. In many ways, it is a more literal translation than the original NAB and has attempted to be more consistent in rendering Hebrew or Greek words and idioms, especially in technical contexts, such as regulations for sacrifices. In translating, the Psalter special effort was made to provide a smooth, rhythmic translation for easy singing or recitation and to retain the concrete imagery of the Hebrew. Where the Old Testament translation supposes the received text, Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, as the case may be, ordinarily contained in the best-known editions, as the original or the oldest extant form, no additional remarks are necessary. Where the translators have departed from those received texts, e.g., by following the Septuagint rather than the Masoretic text, accepting a reading of what is judged to be a better textual tradition, as from a Qumran manuscript, or by amending a reading apparently corrupted in transmission, such changes are recorded in the revised edition of the textual notes on the New American Bible. Additional information on the textual tradition for some books may be found in the introduction to the book in the same textual notes. In particular, important manuscripts from Cave 4 of Qumran, as well as the most useful recensions of the Septuagint, have been consulted in the preparation of 1 and 2 Samuel. Fragments of the lost book of Tobit in Aramaic and in Hebrew, recovered from Cave 4 of Qumran, are in substantial agreement with the Sinaiticus Greek recension used for the translation of this book. The lost original Hebrew text of 1 Maccabees is replaced by its oldest extant form in Greek. Judith, 2 Maccabees, and parts of Esther are also translated from the Greek. The translation of the Wisdom of Ben Sira is based on the original Hebrew as far as it is preserved, with corrections from the ancient versions. Otherwise, the Greek of the Septuagint is followed. In the book of Baruch, the basic text is the Greek of the Septuagint, with some readings derived from an underlying Hebrew form no longer extant. In the deuterocanonical sections of Daniel 3:24-90, 13:1, 14:42, the basic text is the Greek text of so-called Theodotion, occasionally revised according to the Greek text of the Septuagint.